charging the mound, screaming in people's faces, trashing the dugout, throwing hats, bats, and balls, and sometimes even throwing punches. There are truly as many ways players can show their immaturity as there are to scratch a run across. As long as players have existed on the diamond, they've been throwing tantrums. Take for instance the brutal on-field altercation between Juan Marichal and John Roseborough back in 1965. When the catcher's return throw to ace Sandy Koufax buzzed Marichal's ear, Juan struck Roseborough twice with his bat, opening a gruesome bloody wound on the backstop's head. The two made up in the following years, but still, an attempted bludgeoning during a ball game is an outsized reaction to what was nothing more than an accident. Now, before we get into the actual players I'm going to catalog, I do want to acknowledge that this assortment of guys is biased a bit towards the last 30 years or so. This is because that's about when the media began having an enormous insight into players' personalities, and those personalities only grew larger under such an intensive magnifying glass. This is also when the era of social media started creeping in, which allowed one's misdeeds to be able to spread within seconds instead of the customary hours to even days. I'm also going to try to look at players that were voraciously immature, either resulting in violence, outright infantile behavior, or some combination of both. As such, a player like Barry Bonds won't be profiled, as he largely operates in the prima donna space, one a bit separate from the immaturity one. Comment below if you want to see me do a most arrogant or egotistical players in baseball list. If I do, he'll be A1 on it. With that being said, let's hop into our first player. Nyjer Morgan's antics today are legendary for their raw immaturity. For example, in 2010, Baltimore outfielder Adam Jones hit what probably would have been a double had Morgan played the ball right, but instead he made a leaping effort and the ball clanged off of Nyjer's glove before bouncing back into the field of play. But then, instead of, cutting his losses by picking up the ball and throwing it in, Morgan threw a fit on the spot, slamming his glove into the ground, ripping off his ball cap, and stomping around like a petulant child, thus giving up an inside the park homer. This and a couple other incidents that were similar ended up causing Morgan to be labeled a head case. He steamrolled catchers in blowout games, would miss catches and then throw his glove into the stands, and once even charged the mound to try to throw punches at a 6'8" Chris Volstad. That one wasn't as much immaturity in the sense that he shouldn't have fought, more so in that, during his blind rage, he somehow believed he could win versus somebody who was almost a foot taller than him. Of course, this wouldn't end well for Morgan. Perhaps his most infamous tantrum was throwing a ball into the stands and intentionally hitting a fan. In the middle of the 9th inning, in a game between the Nats and the Philadelphia Phillies, Morgan was being lambasted by quote-unquote drunk and disorderly hecklers. So, instead of either ignoring them or firing back with his own words, Nyjer heaved a ball into the stands, nailing an unassuming Phils fan in the temple. This resulted in Morgan receiving a 7-game suspension, and having yet another nail driven into the coffin that was his public image. Why he believed this was an appropriate response was probably born of the same immature mind that invented Tony Plush, an apparent character he would switch into during games. In fact, he had an assortment of these so-called alter egos, Plush being his quote scumbag name. Well, at least there's a dose of self-awareness among the bizarre. Next up is longtime Cubs pitcher, El Toro himself, Carlos Zambrano. While guys like Nyjer Morgan's immaturity might have come out in the form of on-field blow-ups, Zambrano was also outright lazy to boot. He was often called out for his lack of consistent work ethic and absolutely no desire to train despite being the face of the Cubs franchise for so many years. And he admitted as much himself once, famously declaring, "My problem is, I've been lazy." At the time, he was plagued by a bulging disc in his back. Doctors allegedly told him that doing abdominal exercises would help ease the pressure. But Zambrano went on to state, "One of the things I don't like to do is my abs." So, quite simply, he didn't. And, perhaps unsurprisingly, he retired in his early 30s. But Zambrano wasn't immune to outbursts either, including multiple nuclear meltdowns against umpires, and the occasional teammate. Like in 2010, when he and first baseman Derek Lee almost came to blows after Zambrano gave up 4 runs to the Chicago White Sox, following a play Z thought Derek should have made. Then manager Lou Piniella sent the red-faced flamethrower home and banned him from the ballpark the next day. He was also known for breaking bats over his knee when he struck out, consistently firing his mitt against the dugout wall when things weren't going his way, and taking his frustrations out on the dugout Gatorade dispenser. Lazy when working on himself, but demanding of others when it came to their performance? What's more immature than that? Next up is Manny Ramirez. Where do we even begin? Manny being Manny was one of baseball's first memes, appearing in print over 1,600 times throughout Ramirez's career. While some of these instances references slash lines or memorable homers, many others detail the insane stories of Manny's immaturity that he displayed both on and off the field. One of the first examples of Manny being Manny came soon after his call up to the bigs. A Guardians, then Indians, PR director had to sit the young ball player down for a chat. "How you doing for money?" the PR person said. "I'm doing great," Manny responded. "You need some?" As it turned out, Manny hadn't cashed his last 2 months worth of paychecks. A quick search revealed that Ramirez had left a breadcrumb trail of massive checks, crumpled in his locker, in his glove box, and even in a pair of boots he almost left behind following an away game in Texas. But Manny being Manny didn't end at his absent-mindedness. While on the Red Sox roster, Ramirez was also known for his, let's say, colorful persona. He once relieved himself mid-inning while inside the Green Monster, lost his $15,000 diamond earring sliding into third base in a rehab game, then demanded help looking for it for multiple minutes, delaying the entire ballgame, and even refused to stand with a Little Leaguer for the national anthem during a public relations promotion. And while all of these, besides the Little Leaguer thing, had elements of humor to them, there were also instances of Manny being Manny that simply weren't funny at all. Not even a little bit. Like when he shoved Boston's 64-year-old traveling secretary Jack McCormick to the ground in 2008 for not reserving him 16 seats to an away game in Houston. Let's just say, neither Bo Sox fans nor the front office loved that, nor did they love his penchant for mysteriously contracting calf tightness so close to the trade deadline, or how one time when the Yankees were in town, Manny declared himself too sick to play, but yet not too sick to go to the hotel bar with Yankee infielder Enrique Wilson, who was a former teammate of his while in the Cleveland Indians, and live it up a bit. Immature might be the only word to properly describe the phenomenon that Manny being Manny at its height became, but at least part of it was positive, right? Or at least goofy? The same could not be said for the next guy on our list. What probably could be said about Milton Bradley is that he had a near monopoly on being an immature a-hole with a violent streak. Some might say, at the peak of his powers, putting him on the field was like playing Jenga, and he could topple over with the slightest misstep. Okay, board game puns aside, Milton Bradley was a problem. He once gave Texas Rangers fans the finger mid-game, just up and left the stadium during a different contest in which he'd been struggling, and once verbally assaulted an umpire so badly he not only got kicked for the game, but subsequently for another, after the league had learned of what he said. Did I mention that that was just in one season with the Seattle Mariners? Which ended up being his last season in professional baseball, in fact. The tales almost seem mythical in their levels of volcanic stupidity. Another time, after losing his temper following some harsh remarks made to him by an umpire responding to his own frustration, Bradley got so upset that he ended up being basically wrestled to the ground by his own manager, Bud Black. He resisted so much he ended up tearing his ACL in the process. Subsequently, the Padres went on to miss the postseason by one game, with then middle-of-the-order Bradley's absence looming large. But Bradley's violence wasn't limited to the baseball field. In 2015, he spent 32 months in prison for domestic violence and weapons charges, and in June 2018, violated his probation with more domestic violence convictions. Basically, his own version of immaturity was that of a toddler throwing a tantrum that just never grew up. And when you're 6 feet, 215 pounds, that's a downright scary proposition. We now come to the only player who is on this list for solely being downright childish in their approach to the game, without the violent streak. Someone who got busted for performance-enhancing drugs and then lied about taking them. Somebody who, at their core, was a serial cheater. Alex Rodriguez. His brand of immaturity is born of an almost pitiful sense of superiority and arrogance, but it was certainly colored by a perception of the world that was just immature. There's no other way to put it. After his initial PED report came out, there was an MLB investigation and an onslaught of bad publicity, but Rodriguez remained firm that he had never used any steroids. For 2 years and profiles in over 5 print publications, he kept up the lie, maintaining that he was the victim of a, quote, witch hunt, resulting in an unjust suspension from baseball, and that he was going to fight to the last to clear his spotless name. Well, the only thing about that was that it was a total fabrication, and Rodriguez only ended up coming clean to federal agents in order to avoid prosecution, ratting out everybody who'd helped him procure the ill-gotten injections from the Florida-based anti-aging clinic where he had gotten his stash. After what felt like a pretty insincere apology, he still didn't take responsibility, instead choosing to go with the story that he thought the HGH being injected into his butt was just vitamins. Sure, Alex. Sure. But that obviously wasn't the only evidence for this immature rap, as in addition to many accounts of him mistreating staffers and other people in the Yankees organization for over a decade, he got caught trying to cheat mid-game not once, but twice. First by screaming, "I got it," as an opponent attempted to catch a pop-up, resulting in them believing that it was their teammate calling them off and the ball dropping. And also by literally slapping the ball from Red Sox pitcher Bronson Arroyo's glove in the 2004 ALCS. At least that one didn't end up standing. At his height, he was so into cheating in fact that he got caught doing it on his own partners twice that we know of. First on his initial wife, and then again on Jennifer Lopez. In an interview with New York Magazine, A-Rod's first ex-wife put it pretty succinctly. I would say he's immature. We do have one honorable mention on this list from the dusty era of baseball, back when these stories couldn't be verified very easily, but regardless, this guy was so bizarre in his actions, I just had to mention them. and that's former Baltimore Orioles player and New York Giants manager, John McGraw. McGraw was a gritty player with a flaming temper of his own and an old school brand of, let's call it, eccentric immaturity. As a player, McGraw helped usher in the era of the Baltimore chop and the hit and run play. Also, according to Bleacher Report, he would routinely trip players rounding third base, spike them, and grab their belt loops to hold them back and keep them from tagging up. Leading one sports writer to opine, he adopts every low and contemptible method that his erratic brain can conceive to win a play by a dirty trick. I saw that line and thought to myself, what sounds more immature than grabbing someone by their belt to hold them back from running? Downright sounds like something out of a cartoon. As a manager for the Giants, McGraw's style was much more strict than oddly immature, though he did once ban his players from smiling in the dugout. Yeah, smiling. From losing your cool and getting thrown out from games, lying about performance-enhancing drugs, or just forgetting your paycheck in a pair of cowboy boots, immaturity can come in a number of different packages. Some harmless, some certainly not. But the one thing every player probably wants to avoid is becoming an icon for the wrong reasons, letting this rep get in the way of their legacy. But for at least everybody on the list today, that's exactly what happened. Don't get it twisted, this isn't even close to every one of the most immature baseball players in MLB history, and I'd love to do a part 2. So if this vid hits 4,000 likes, we'll do just that. For that reason, be sure to comment your suggestions for who you'd like to see in it as well if we end up making it. Now, thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed today's video. Remember to like and subscribe if you did, and consider checking out this playlist for other essay content just like this. Have a great rest of your day, everybody.